Here we go. Okay, cast light. So how do we do this, first of all, and then what does it look like? Let's start with how we're gonna do it. Since you're gonna need to have at least 3 areas of color that you're then modifying with the illusion of a light being cast upon it, I've got 3 here. Could be more if you want. So I'm thinking that these 3 colors, they're all very saturated, and they have very specific intervals of value to each other. So that's the first thing I'm thinking of and identifying. So let's say I start with the purple. So my idea is that you put this purple over that, and then you're getting the sense of a light being cast. But it doesn't really look like much yet because it doesn't have the other colors reinforcing it yet. So what if I do something like that? Now I'm starting to kind of see this idea of that this is a more lit area of those same colors, right? And then I'll try something like this. Now, to me right away, I'm seeing that I'm getting some of the illusion, but I'm having a problem here, which is that I'm looking at each of these in terms of their value differentials, right? And these look pretty, so I think this is the darkest original color, lightest original color, middle original color. So these have to follow that same kind of interval. So this is looking a little, it's darker than this, so that's not too bad. But then here, these are almost the same value, and I know that this is a lot darker. So this isn't perfect, but I think it's okay. So what I need to do is just find something like a little bit lighter. And now I'm starting to feel like this could even be a hair lighter than that maybe. But I feel like I'm starting to get this kind of continuancy of all those intervals kind of agreeing on value, on the color not changing too much except maybe like white or light being added to it. And the saturation is changing equally by the white being added, right? So that's the first 2. Let me show you what those look like. Let's see, here's the first one study. In this study, make this a large interval. Okay, here's my large interval. You can see that the kind of illuminated area is 8 times lighter, let's say on a grayscale, than the kind of background areas. When you have such a large interval, it's a little bit easier to kind of make it look convincing, even if you don't get the color perfect, because you're being so strong on the value jump, right? Like if I were to critique this, let's say, I think it's a pretty good one. I won't critique it. I think it looks pretty good. It feels like that this is, related to that, just with white added. This is related to that. This is related to that. This is related to that. One thing I will maybe check. Oh, I know how I can critique it a little bit. If I look at these are kind of the darker of the 4. Those 2 are kind of paired. And I don't see quite the same relationship within here, but it's not bad. It's pretty good. Here's another one of a pretty large interval. In a way, you could think of the same thing as it's either like the idea of cast light or even the same thing, but reverse of that is almost like a shadow being cast. It's kind of 2 of the same thing. So there, I would say this one I have a little more critique of. It feels like maybe this light is changing a little too much. Maybe it's kind of getting too red overall. Maybe that was the assignment actually, but I'm going to use it as an example. This feels like I don't see the relationship between those 2 together so much, right? That's not bad. Yeah, this one I feel like has a lot of problems, so that's a bad pile. Okay. The second one, this gets a little harder, is to find an interval that is a lot closer. So here's a really beautifully subtle one where it's very close, where you can think of it as that the amount of white being added is just 1 click lighter, right? It's very subtle, and I feel like all those colors are very, very well they stay in line in terms of their color, right? They're just changing a little bit of the value. Maybe this gets a slight bit orange, but really it's such a challenge to do it that close of an interval. I'd give this a really, really good pile. Okay. So, and then the last one is, in this study, try having the illuminated area have a yellow cast. So let me show you an example of that. Here the idea is that this thing is almost like a gelled color, a gelled amount of white. It's lighter than all those original colors, or it should be. But it feels like there's a bit of yellow in the light being mixed in. So if I go back to this original thing, I have some that I picked out here that rather than let's say this thing, which feels like it doesn't change too much in terms of the temperature here. This feels like that's going a lot yellower, perhaps. If I add yellow to the purple, what happens? It doesn't just kind of feel like it's yellow, it actually kind of desaturates a little bit in a way. Kind of feeling that I didn't really nail the value relationship there, but I'm starting to get the color look right. And then maybe this one, probably too much yellow in that, right? So the idea is you're looking for these colors that are lightening up and also skewing a little bit in their temperature towards yellow. Okay, so those are the first 3 cast light studies. Any questions about any of that? No, I'll put those examples up, and for some reason, I can't find all my examples. There's even more on Moodle, I believe, or will be as soon as I put them up. Okay.
And what about the last one, number 4?
That's what I'm gonna get to right now. You always keep me honest and keep going. So this is this idea of a Bezold effect. It's made out of just 3 elements. Can anyone kind of see what's happening there? It feels like where the black triangles are moving in, it kind of feels to kind of like it darkens that side. And then here, like that feels darker than that, right? And it's because this kind of area feels like it's drawn by the lighter, small rectangles. Here's another one where this same blue runs through the whole thing, but you can see that the kind of the dark black, purple color and that kind of pink color are kind of making those feel very different. So it's this idea of kind of drawing an area, not literally drawing it, but kind of encircling an area, let's say. It can be straight across, it can be kind of squared off, it can be kind of circular. And how do we do that? That's the key question. So first thing is that you need to think that you need to kind of identify 3 basic values. Color is not going to do a whole lot here. It's mostly about value. So you need to identify 3 basic values. The ground value will be kind of the middle one. It doesn't have to be smack in the middle of the other 2, but somewhere in the middle. And then here I've cut out some of these little triangles that represent a kind of a much darker and a much lighter value. Now the key thing to this is that's the first part, not too hard to do, but the key part to this, like the cast lights where this kind of formal setup is important, just like the ones you were doing with transparency last week, where you have to have this kind of sense of the kind of line, the contiguous shapes kind of representing each other, and then the overlap. Like this, it's not just selecting the color, it's about kind of finding the right format to do it. And there are a lot of formats you can do it in, such as kind of demonstrated by this one, very kind of straight across, one kind of a little more meandering, organic. They can be kind of circular or whatever, but the first thing you need to do is think of a kind of a shape-making idea. So although I don't want you to do that, on this you can kind of see I've drawn this line here. So what I'd like you to do is, when you do the projects, draw that as an imaginary shape. You don't want to actually see the pencil. I just did it here to kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to try and do. Then the key is, first of all, to make the field large, and then these little triangles, they could also be little half domes, little squares, relatively small, not too big, because we need to have them kind of meld into kind of an area in a sense. So let's say that I'm going to make the interior lighter. I start arranging these. So think of that imaginary line that I'm starting to draw, and I'm kind of following it with this kind of alternating space where they're bumped right up against each other, corner to corner. But I'm kind of, I'm sequestering the dark ones on the outside. I feel like I'm starting to see it. I don't know if you can see that yet. So format on this is very important. Anyway, I could go on, but I'm starting to see that thing. Do you see that? Where this side feels like it's drawing a kind of a lighter quality out of that ground, and this feels a little bit darker. So that's basically how to do that. Like, try playing with some of the formal invention you can to do this, but the basic thing is think of kind of like this imaginary line that demarcates areas and have this alternating thing where they're butted right up against each other. If I start doing something like this, it starts kind of destroying because I can see through the border line in a way, right? So the key is that alternating thing, small bits, and these 3 values. So I would say when you start doing that, kind of start cutting them out, playing with it a little bit, and I will come around and help, give you some tips or whatever. So those are the 4 projects. Okay, I'm just gonna turn this off real